Hi, folks. This is Akshay Dhave, and I'm going to take you through the last session for today's XP day. And this session is on a practice called adaptive planning. And this practice really brings together a bunch of things that we've learned throughout the day. So it's quite exciting. Um, so let's talk about the what and why of adaptive planning. Now, if you've done any project management, project planning at all, you would have heard the term called the golden triangle. And the golden triangle is nothing but a way to balance three primary levers that you have for any kind of project management. There's not even necessarily software projects, um, but it's applicable completely in software projects as well. And the three levers that you have are the lever of scope. So you could vary how much you deliver in a particular project. You could vary the cost of what how many people are working on this project, right? So the cost that you incur, and you could vary the time. So you could vary how long will it take to deliver something. So those are the three levers, and the idea behind putting them on a triangle is to say that there's a balance to be maintained between these 3 points, these three levers. And so the theory is that you can only fix two of these variables and not all the three of them. So you could fix the time and cost, but not the scope. You could fix the scope and cost and keep time flexible. So you could say that I want these 20 features and I only have 10 people to work on this project, but then be flexible about how long it takes to deliver that project. Or you could fix the scope and time and say, okay, I want these 20 features and I want them in 3 months, but keep the number of people variable so that you can add more people to get it done faster if it's not going fast enough. So you can fix two of these variables. And the reason why you don't want to fix all the three is because there is actually a hidden variable here. And the hidden variable is quality. And if you fix all the three, if you fix scope and cost and time, then the only thing that can move is quality. And it always moves in the wrong direction, right? So you're going to degrade quality and you're going to deliver a substandard product if you try to fix scope as well as time and cost. So that's not something that you want to do because that's not beneficial to anyone. So let's look at this in practice a little bit, and we'll also look at what is the XP way of dealing with the golden triangle. So typically, you would start with something like an inception when you're kicking off a project. This is nothing but an initiation of a project where you bring multiple stakeholders together and you try to do some requirement analysis, you come up with a backlog, and then you get the team to estimate the backlog. And again, if you're working in a agile fashion, you would typically estimate in story points. So let's say that you come up with 200 points worth of backlog. And then you would go into the release planning activity. And the release planning activity takes into consideration a lot of different things, uh, like holidays and parallelization and how many people are there on the team, all of those things. But essentially, what you're trying to do is plot these 200 points over a period of time and try to answer the question, when will we get done? When will these 200 story points get done so that we can go live? So typically you'll create a graph that looks like this. This is called a burn up chart. And so you'll have scope on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, time in the form of iterations. And you can plot the scope line. So that's your 200 points that you discovered in the inception. And then you have some prediction of how many story points can a team deliver in every iteration, right? And so you add all that up to come up with this kind of a green line. So every iteration, the team delivers some story points, and the point at which these two lines intersect is really when you're done with the 200 points worth of scope. And so you can say that in iteration 10, we have delivered all the scope, and so we can go live in iteration 10. So that's typically what you would come up with as a project plan. And that's all fine and dandy until it's in Excel sheets and in assumptions. But then reality hits, right? And that's what your actual velocity looks like. Um, and overall, it is lower than what you planned for, right? And that's a very typical scenario. In rare situations, you might be going faster, and even that still means that your plan is incorrect, right? But basically, we have to understand that these plans that we come up with at the beginning of the project are absolutely based on assumptions, and so they are going to be incorrect, and there is no shame in admitting that. We as a species have not figured this out, and so it's completely fine that your plan that you came up with at the beginning of a project does not hold true 3 iterations, 4 iterations into the project, right? So the idea behind adaptive planning is really very, very simple. It is to respond to this reality, to take into consideration what is actually happening, and to not just keep hoping that you will get back to that velocity that you had originally planned, and you will meet all the promises that you had made to the client at the starting of the project, right? The very simple thing that you have to do is to respond to this reality. Your actual velocity is lower, and so you have to do something about it now, right? So that's really the concept of adaptive planning, because this has to be done every iteration. Right from iteration 1 or 2, you already knew that you're going slower than what you had planned for, and so what are you going to do to make some changes to the plan so that it reflects the reality? That's the real question. But let's get into a little more detail about how we use the golden triangle and what is the XP preferred method of using the golden triangle to respond to this situation, right? So the reality is, like we said, you're going slower than you planned, and so you can project what that new timeline looks like, or new velocity line looks like, right? So again, this is an estimate. This dotted line is still an estimate, but now at least you have a new point where this dotted line intersects with the scope line, right? And so your option 1 could be to say, let's increase the time. And so instead of delivering 200 points in iteration 10, we are now going to deliver 200 points in iteration 14. And so let's give ourselves those 4 more iterations, and that's the new plan that we work with. So this is one way to respond to the reality. And so you could have a client conversation around this, saying, hey, Mr. Client, we're not able to deliver the 200 points in iteration 10. We are going to deliver them in iteration 14. And so that's the new reality that we all have to deal with. That's option 1. Now, option 2 could be to add more people to increase the velocity. So you know that you had 20 people working on the project and the velocity is not good enough. So you're going slower than what you planned for. So could you add 10 more people to make it go faster, and that way still meet this timeline of iteration 10? That's another option that you could use according to the golden triangle. And the third option that you could use is to say, hey, you know what, I'm still going to deliver something at the end of iteration 10. It won't be 200 points, but it might be 150 points, and I'm still going to go live with those 150 points. And that's the third option. So you reduce the scope, right? Now the XP preference in how to use the triangle is option 3. So XP says fix the quality at the highest level, because you don't want to deliver a substandard product. Fix the cost, because adding people in the middle of a slow project is only going to make it go even slower, right? And this has been established well before the XP movement. In fact, a book called Mythical Man Month has busted this myth a long time ago. This was written in the 70s or 80s, I think. And it is well established that adding more people is not going to make your project go faster. So that's a myth. Um, but then XP says fix time as well. Ship whatever you have at the end of that particular timeline. And even if you don't create value, you will at least get feedback about why something is not working, and what can you do to make it better. So XP prefers fixing time and keeping scope flexible. Now, you might think that this is a bit of a cop out. We are doing a disservice to our clients by saying that, oh, we will only deliver so much. Because initially we said that we're going to deliver more. So let's look at why is keeping scope flexible is actually useful, not only for the team, but for the client as well. And when we say team, the client is typically part of the team, but even for the larger client organization, keeping scope flexible is is an important aspect of delivering good software. And so let's look at why. Now, the first reason why we want to keep scope flexible is because this plan is a myth, right? This plan is not real. Uh, in fact, your scope is always going to increase, right? So this 200 points that you came up with at the beginning of the inception, that's not going to stay 200 points. You're going to keep adding new scope because someone is waking up worrying about this project, right? So it's a good thing that scope is increasing. Someone is waking up and thinking of new features to add. Someone is looking at the competition and thinking of ways to beat the competition. The team themselves is figuring out newer ways in which they can add value to the customer. And so your actual scope keeps on increasing. And so there is no real concept of all the scope, right? Because what is all? The definition of all keeps changing all the time. And so there is no point in waiting until you finish all the scope, right? If you're keeping scope fixed and you're increasing time, then basically you're saying that I'm going to finish all the scope, and it'll take as long as it takes. And that's not a meaningful way to go about it, because the definition of all keeps changing. So what you can do instead is to say, what is the most valuable thing that I can deliver, and let's concentrate on that. Yeah. The second reason why keeping scope flexible makes sense is because the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, applies to software development as well. And so typically 20% of your features are going to deliver 80% of the value for your customers. And that means that if you have done your prioritization well, then all your higher value features have already been done well before iteration 10. And so even if some of the lower value features don't make it in iteration 10, it's not a big problem. It shouldn't be a big problem, right? So you need to concentrate on prioritization and ensure that you're delivering the most valuable features for your customers at the beginning of the project, right? And the third reason why it makes sense to keep scope flexible is because we would be building on the practice of continuous delivery, right? And so if you have continuous delivery in place, even if some of the valuable features don't make it in the release at the end of iteration 10, it's not like you're going to wait another 6 months before you release something. You're going to release something at least every iteration, if not every day, right? And so if you have continuous delivery in place, it becomes a very simple conversation with the client, because you're going to say, hey, you know what, iteration 10 we deliver the first release, but iteration 11 we're going to deliver something more, and in iteration 12 and 13 and 14 we'll keep delivering more and more points. So we'll so the scope is going to keep increasing, and we are going to keep delivering newer features prioritized by value in a continuous fashion. And so that's really what adaptive planning means. It means that you have to respond to the reality that There might be genuine reasons because of which you're not going as fast as you thought you would. And you have to take that reality into consideration and modify the plan and keep everyone in involved abreast of the new plan, right? Including the client, including the internal stakeholders. Um, and while you respond to the reality, you have to keep the XP preference in mind. And just to revise, the XP preference is fixed quality at the highest level, fixed cost, because adding more people in the middle of a project doesn't make sense, fixed time, and ship whatever you have so that you at least get feedback if you don't end up creating value for your customers, and keep the scope flexible. So that's the idea behind adaptive planning. um, I hope this made sense. We can talk more in the actual session. So see you there. Bye.